Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the School Transformation Programme, the School Technicians session today for the South Australian Department for Education. We've got a few people who've helped to create the content today. This is something that Microsoft have created in conjunction with the department, and we have most of these people on the call from the department as well. I think Trudy may not be on today. So we have Cindy, Scott, Josh and Kylie. From the cloud platforms and the technology adoption teams. And presenting the majority of the content today, there's myself, Richard Heaton, and I'm a technology strategist with Microsoft in the education team. Work with the department in South Australia, but also Victoria, Tasmania, and a few TAFEs here in Victoria as well. I've been with Microsoft a little bit over 15 years now. We also have Troy Waller. Troy, I'll just let you introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm a learning delivery specialist. So I come from 20-something years in education. I need to work out what that actually is. It's 20-something. And I am a former teacher. So I spent 16 of those years actually in schools as a teacher, a lot of it in primary, but a little bit in secondary as well.
Thanks, Troy. So today's session is for school technicians and the technology leadership within schools, and we'll hopefully give you a good grounding in Microsoft 365. So our intent today isn't really to deep dive into the technology, but it's really to focus on how the Microsoft platform can support teaching and learning in your schools. We'll run through the key elements of the platform and provide a view of what we call the desired end state. We'll also provide some pointers to the best resource, or some of the best resources on the Microsoft website to support the journey that you and your teams will be on. And so this presentation will be made available to you at the end as a resource for you to review. And I'd recommend that you check out some of the links that we provide as well, because they do go down into that next level of detail that everybody likes to see. So, but before we share the agenda for today, we'll just set the scene a little bit on the impact we've seen over the last 18 months. We're all back to school today after COVID, after a COVID lockdown in Victoria and in South Australia as well. So there's been a big impact there, but we'll also set the context of the broader school transformation program that Troy and his team run. So what I've got here is a little snapshot of the usage of Microsoft 365 services in the South Australian department between December 19 and August 20. So this is pretty much from last year. We'll see a few interesting points here. So point one is kind of where we were at December 19. So typical usage. Relatively low usage of things like Microsoft Teams, a reasonable usage of things like Exchange Online. We always get a drop in January, February, and it's important to note here, these are kind of a rolling monthly active usage. So anybody uses the service in a meaningful way within a 30-day period, it gets counted in here. So we always have that drop off in January when everybody goes home and goes on the holidays. But what we saw last year, instead of it just returning back to the kind of levels we'd seen at one, at point 3 there was when COVID struck, and you can particularly see Teams has gone right from the bottom to sort of up to near the top of the usage graph here, where we peaked at about 65,000 monthly active users in the department's environment last year. That's out of about 200,000 students, 30,000 staff members. Many of those students in the lower age groups don't even have access to Office 365, so we saw a massive increase, probably 8-fold uptick. And after that point, from sort of 4 onwards, we see it kind of level out. And as we extend that graph into this year, what we see is there's a bit of a drop off from point 4 down to 5, and then it sort of runs along fairly level, drops again in January as we expect, and picks up again after the main summer break. And we're sort of bouncing along at 40-odd thousand active users in Microsoft Teams on a monthly basis now. This graph I took last week, it ends on the 19th of July, so never guess what's happened in the last 10 days. The numbers have shot up again. So Teams usage is the one we tend to focus on. It's the one we measure at Microsoft, has gone from about 45,000 up to 69,000 in the last 10 days. So we've seen another 20-odd thousand monthly active users jump in on Microsoft Teams. There's a reason for that. It's a really, really important tool when we look at remote delivery or blended delivery of learning, as we tend to call it these days. It really is that hub that provides a place to bring everything together for the Microsoft platform and other applications in the education environment, but also is that primary tool for remote learning. So if you're delivering video-based meetings, etc., Teams is the part of the platform. There were some interesting things through this time as we've seen peaks and troughs of Teams usage. It's actually put quite a lot of stress on the Microsoft environment as well at the back end. So we've seen, huge increases, 8-10-fold increases around the world. So, that's been a process that the cloud's been able to handle. The cloud's been able to handle, and we've not suffered any major outages as a result. So that's great news. What I'll do now is just jump into the agenda. We'll step you through these things in turn today. So first up, Troy's going to give us an overview of what the School Transformation Programme is, because there are 4 main tracks to that, of which this is the supporting technicians track. We'll look at that at desired end state, which really is how can we provide a platform that will deliver school leaders and educators the capabilities they need to go through the school transformation process using Microsoft 365. Look at some of those considerations for a multi-site environment, and then we'll just double click a little bit on Microsoft Teams as that hub for education. Take a quick break. We'll talk a bit about browsers because they're sort of back in the news with changes to things like Internet Explorer and Edge. Troy will take us through a little bit on accessibility, and then we'll look at Microsoft 365 apps in a bit more detail and why it's important that we stay current, and a little bit of guidance on deployment. And then stepping into a bit on OneDrive and some SharePoint school templates just to wrap things up. So first thing we're going to do as part of this agenda is hand over to Troy, who'll take us through the School Transformation Programme overview. One final note, though, is I'm an old dog. You can't teach me new tricks. So while we call it Microsoft 365 apps nowadays, I'll probably refer to it as Office Pro Plus at some stage. And Microsoft Endpoint Config Manager, I'll probably call SCCM as we go through this. So apologies, I'll use those interchangeably. But over to Troy.
Thanks, Rich. I'll get you to keep driving those slides if that's all right. Sorry, one back. Sorry.
Drive them badly. There you go. Sorry.
Okay, cool. So so welcome, folks, those of you that are watching the recording, those of you that are here. So your school is part of the Microsoft School Transformation Program, which, as we see there, is a free professional learning program to transform the way teachers and students use technology that they already have at their fingertips. So it's not in any way a veiled sales program or anything like that. It's totally about making sure that everybody has full access and full understanding of all the tools that the department has already purchased for schools, for teachers, for students, etc. So what we wanted to do was try and bring the entire, I shouldn't say the entire school, but bring the staff together and start having conversations and also becoming aware of, of the Microsoft stack, but also how to best use that in a teaching and learning way. One of the things when I did some study a little while ago on education, we were constantly reminded to everything that we do, bring back, how does this impact teaching and learning? How does this impact teaching and learning? And so that's a little bit of a value that I have. And so that's what this ultimately will impact, but not just directly, but indirectly. So you folks here as IT professionals serve an extremely important role in making sure that things are switched on, that things are working, and we really value you. So we wanted to make sure that you're a part of this, but more of that in a minute. Thanks, Rich. So we have this thing called the Microsoft K-12 Education Transformation Framework. We at Microsoft love an acronym, so we call it the ETF. And it is a research-backed, both research and practice-backed framework that we use to show digital transformation. And so the School Transformation Program is very much based on that. And so we have different workshops that will touch on different points on the ETF. So you can see there the key areas that we touch on are leadership, educators, of course, being the teachers, accessibility, and then lastly, you guys, the technicians, right, and making sure that everything is enabled and we are at that desired state. So the first workshop in our series of workshops is the leadership one. The first option for that happened yesterday. The next one is next week. So your leaders are already involved in this. And the idea for this is to create or continue to create, if they're already on that path, a shared vision for the digital transformation of your school, because we know that leadership is as important as teachers because they drive the culture in the school and they're often the business decision makers in the school. So this workshop is made for principals, deputy principals, e-learning leaders, digital leaders, curriculum leaders, and if your school has an IT director or even an outsourced third-party IT director that comes in, they were welcome to be part of that as well. So it's all about building that vision. Second is the MIE Trainer Academy, or we sometimes call it the e-learning leaders Institute. And this is for those middle leaders in the school. So they are still the teachers, and we want to upskill them to support other teachers in the school and to deliver professional development. So it's all about train the trainer. And then they also work on a training project. So again, it's those middle leaders, some of whom might have gone to the leadership workshop as well, but it's e-learning leaders, digital leaders, curriculum leaders, stage leaders, faculty leaders, those kinds of people that have a hand in the technology. The Inclusive Classroom Workshop is probably, well, from my perspective anyway, it's one of the most important workshops in the session because it's all about using technology in ways that can support those students that need that little bit of extra help. So this is your learning support leaders, learning support teachers, teacher aides, support professionals as well who may not be regularly at your school but come in from time to time. So occupational therapists, speech pathologists, etc., and any sort of aspiring classroom teachers as well. Once upon a time, technology promised so much in terms of what we can do in the classroom to support students, but I genuinely believe we have seen that that momentum build to the point where now the tools are really delivering, right? And it's not just specialized technology, it's features within the ubiquitous Microsoft tools. So, you know, within Word, within PowerPoint, within Excel, etc. And the other one that's already happened is the Discover Microsoft 365 for Newbies. This is, in fact, all our sessions will be recorded and you can reach out to Cindy Dennison to get copies of these if you've got people in your school who missed it. But this is the introduction to educators and school leaders, people that are brand new to Microsoft 365, right? So I think the recording is probably going to be accessed more than we had huge numbers in there, but it's just the people that just feel, you know, yeah, I know Word, yeah, I know PowerPoint, yeah, I know Outlook, but I really don't understand how this all fits together and where Microsoft's at. So if you've got people in your school, by all means, steer them to this.
That's great. Thanks, Troy. So I guess what I wanted to touch on here is when we redesigned the technicians track to be specific to the department's environment, we wanted to really, I had to think about it, you know, I was brought in to help Troy out with these sessions, how to think about what I'd want to see in your shoes. And really, that's why we wanted to ground it first with an understanding of what the broader school transformation program is all about. Because ultimately, you know, if I was in your position, I'd want to know what my leadership team and educators would be coming back from the sessions with Troy and Travis, expecting, wanting, or hoping for from their Microsoft 365 environment. So we'll take you through what that will look like, what they'll be wanting, hoping, and expecting from the teams here. We'll also understand a little bit more about why it's important that we can provide this desired end state and what that desired end state is. And ultimately, you know, how can technology support this school transformation journey? It's a vital piece. It's not everything, but it is a vital piece in the puzzle, and that's where you and the teams really come into your own. So, and the final thing, as I mentioned before, is, you know, where to go for more technical guidance. The presentation will be made available. There are lots of links to, you know, whether they be, you know, microsoftdocs.com articles, tutorials, videos, etc. So please take advantage of that as a resource, and let us know if there are other things that you want us to, you know, provide a little bit more depth on. But ultimately, you know, we've done a good job at Microsoft of pulling all our documentation together, and docs.microsoft.com really is the place to go for all that. So don't hesitate in clicking on those links and jumping into a bit more detail. So with that, I now wanted to touch on what we've called the desired end state, and this is really, you know, what you can do or what you need to enable within your school environments to. Sorry, I might just kill that phone. Just to ensure that you know, teachers and leadership are going to get what they need when they come back from those workshops and look to implement Microsoft 365 for teaching and learning. boil this down to basically 3 layers, sort of starting at the bottom with our identity, moving up through the cloud services, and then looking at the end user experience that people are going to get. So identity is super important. That's something that's provided for you by the department's central team in the schools saedu.onmicrosoft.com tenancy or at schools.sa.edu.au email addresses you'll be familiar with. So that's all kind of taken care of on your behalf. We then look at those cloud services sitting in Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and sort of underpinning those, there are a range of what we call common services. So these are things like Office 365 groups. We look at the compliance services, so things like information protection. And we also have things like e-discovery as well. And these are really important and probably a little bit underutilized because they give you capabilities like e-discovery, for example, which is the ability to search across all of Microsoft 365, whether that be your Exchange inbox, a SharePoint library, or a Teams chat, to look for specific phrases or terms. So you can do legal discovery in the case of a freedom of information request, or perhaps there's some form of dispute or case that you need to look into. So some really, really important common services that sit there. And this enables the department to get a view across that entire environment of students and teachers. Sitting on top of those, we have our kind of classic Microsoft 365 services that we'll all be familiar with. So things like SharePoint Online and Exchange Online have been around for quite a long time. And then all those other applications like OneNote, Stream, and Yammer, and Planner and Forms. I think there's 20 to 30 plus different applications that can sit in that environment. But increasingly what we're seeing is that, as our strategy evolves as Microsoft, Teams really is the wrapper that goes around all of those services and enables you to surface up the best of Microsoft 365 through a single digital hub for education. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but it really is a critical part of the Microsoft strategy, and it really is where a good percentage of our investment is going when we look at Microsoft 365 across all industries, but specifically in education. We then have a end user experience, and I mentioned before that I've been at Microsoft for 15 plus years, and gone are the days when we used to really care about the client that you use. We still think this experience is best on a Windows device running running Windows 10, with Edge browser. But ultimately, the device and client of choice it's down to the end user. So whether you've got a PC or a Mac, a tablet or a phone, we access these services through the rich Office or Microsoft 365 apps, through the browser or through those mobile apps. So in order to enable our teachers and leadership to come back to an environment where they can do their best work using Microsoft 365, we need to ensure that all these pieces of the puzzle are in play. The final piece to this puzzle, of course, is security. Now, when we talk about the identity layer at the bottom, what's critical here is the shift we've seen in security away from that kind of perimeter security where we sort of build a wall around our environment at the network perimeter and try and keep everybody out. There are so many SaaS-based applications, so much cloud storage in use these days in school environments that identity really has become the new security control plane. So user-based security and management are key, and there are a raft of tools within Microsoft 365 that the department uses to ensure security is well managed. Now, I guess before we dive into the content today, a word on the environment that we're working in. So it is an environment with hundreds of school sites. It's slightly different to working in an individual school environment that some technicians have the luxury of. For example, if they're working at a private school, they're probably king of the castle. They've got access to everything in the Microsoft tool set. So what we've got to do in this type of environment is really balance up what can be done locally and what needs to be done centrally. So, how do we ensure that we get the best practice across security and privacy, and we get good standardization in a centralized environment, while still delivering some flexibility and local autonomy and potentially some admin access to those individual school technicians and technology leaders within schools. And ultimately, it comes down to a balance the department has to strike. As mentioned, I work with Victoria and Tasmania, and it's a common balance that's difficult to get 100% right. But what it does mean is that there are certain things that are going to be set by the department that you can't change. There are certain tool sets that you won't get access to, but there will be other ways that you can do those, perform those duties or switch on capabilities through the department's tool set. So ultimately it comes down to who has to accept responsibility for things like security and duty of care, and that's where the department really kicks in. So as we sort of look at that desired end state, there are some things the department will have control over, and some things that school technicians and IT managers, will have a limited amount of control. So looking over on the right-hand side here, we see things like identity provisioning, any of those kind of tenant-wide settings in Office or Microsoft 365, and some of those central settings for the applications like Teams, policies and settings, they're all going to be controlled by the department. But if we switch to the left-hand side and we start to look at what we'll focus on today, these are the things where you have a bit more influence. So we'll provide that little bit of a platform overview that we're partway through now. We'll look at some of those education scenarios and usage and the configuration that you can undertake, and look at some of those SharePoint templates. But we'll also focus a fair amount of time on the importance of staying current with our Office 365 or Microsoft 365 apps. Take a look at those browser compatibility pieces and the futures there. And Troy will also delve into a little bit around accessibility, which is one of those key elements of the Microsoft platform. So one example of something the department does control that we'd expect that you guys would need to be aware of, in fact, we'd strongly recommend that you make yourselves aware of these, is, and it's published as a knowledge base article by the department, is some of those settings that control how things work in Teams. So these are called Teams policies, and they impact things like messages, meetings, calling capabilities, etc. So there are different policies for students and staff, as you would expect. And we've spent a fair amount of time. We had a recent requirement to review some of these settings as things have changed, and you were back in lockdown last week. Something's perhaps not quite right, so these are constantly being tweaked as new policy settings become available. But these control things like whether certain groups of people can chat to others, one-on-one chat, or what the lobby settings are for meetings as well. Opportunities, Scott, is there anything you want to say about this, or are you happy that we've covered that in adequate detail?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I think that KB is out of date, as in it's the wrong one, so I'll post the correct one later. But just on this, we're going to review, we have got feedback against the current settings, which we always do, and it's guess what Richard said about fine-tuning and getting the balance right between what people want and what other people don't want. So we'll be reviewing most of these settings anyway, and hopefully figuring out a way to make it a bit more configurable, and we just need to work out how to do that. So maybe watch the space, and hopefully we can get the balance right as well.
Yeah, that's a pretty common requirement as well. So some work we've done in Victoria, we have a teacher setting, we have a student setting as default applied across the board, and then we have the option for a couple of different settings to be tweaked by exception. So it's more of a process thing than a technology thing. The technology is there to support it. So yeah, well, happy to take that one on, Scott. We can have a chat about how that could be achieved.
Yep, and like we said, we're definitely going to be reviewing this as a governance group as well.
Fantastic. The other thing that you'll need to be aware of as well, and you're probably already aware of this, is how to onboard users and sites to Office 365 or Microsoft 365 if they're not already switched on. Again, there's another knowledge base article. I hope that's still the current one. We'll update the previous slide for the next session. But basically, you've got to navigate through to the LearnLink admin portal, go to site configuration, Office 365 services, select the site, and if it's applicable, and the activate Office 365 services. So you can then switch on the services that are required. We definitely suggest leaving off Skype for Business. That's going end of life in 3 days' time around the world. There's a slight extension for some environments for 6 months, which you guys will possibly fall into. But at the moment, I wouldn't be switching on Skype. I'd be looking at Teams as the replacement. So at a minimum, you'll need to provide access to these services that are listed here. So Office Online, Office Pro Plus, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Forms, and Stream, because they do provide, I guess, that fundamental basis for the desired end state that we talked about earlier. So just a little bit on what we're aiming for in terms of desired end state. We put together a quick checklist as well, so looking at those things on the back end. So let's make sure we've got Office 365 turned on for the school and the relevant services activated. You've got an idea, you've read through the, we'll update the slide as I mentioned with the correct KB article. You've been through the process, you understand a little bit about Teams creation, which Troy will touch on in a moment, and configuring those teams to make them usable and viable for your teachers. They will have a view on how they should be configured based on some of the workshop work that Troy's done, but there might be a few things you need to guide people on there, and also switching on those templates if that's something your school wants to do with SharePoint. On the client side is probably where you'll end up doing a good portion of your work. We need to make sure that the Microsoft 365 apps are installed and the Teams clients deployed. We want the OneNote client out there as well, Edge Chromium and the OneDrive Sync client. And if we can get those two cloud services at the back end and the client services on the front end organized, we've pretty much ticked off our desired end state checklist. And with that, I'll pass over to Troy. Pass over to Troy, who'll start just stepping us through the use of Microsoft Teams as a digital hub for education.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Richard. So yeah, next slide. Just starting with Office.com, it's important to introduce your staff, and look, we will be doing this through the other workshops, and especially with that middle leaders train the trainer session, we will introduce them to the Office.com webpage. But it is a really good start place because they have, as you can see over there on the left-hand side, they've got access to their web-based apps, including Teams. It's a really good place for them to actually understand and help them to understand the difference between the installed full client, rich client, feature-rich client, and of course the web-based apps. Once upon a time, the web-based apps were less feature-rich versions of the client, but that's just not the case anymore. Parity is really quite high, and there are certainly features in the web-based apps that we don't see in the fully installed client, and a lot of that is to do with collaboration and other bits and pieces as well. It is also where teachers, if they have admin access to their devices, they can go and install the full version of the Microsoft 365 apps. So that's the subscription version. So that means, and Richard's going to go into details with that a little bit later, but it just means that they're able to get the most up-to-date version of Office. And when it comes to the teaching and learning features that we show them, if they're sitting on 2016 or 2019 versions of Office, they're going to be missing out a lot of those features. And so we want to make sure that they've got that version. But I know Richard's also going to speak to you a little bit about being able to push that out and setting policies around making sure that they've got the best version of Office. Next slide. Thanks, Rich. Okay, I'm not sure if, yeah, there we go. Okay. So the other thing to note is that Teams is, it's certainly not replacing your LMS, but there are certainly some LMS features, and there's, it works really, I'm sorry, LMS being, learning management system, but there are some amazing features that you're just not going to find in any other LMS. So, obviously, it's the course materials and management. We're really strong, being able to create those cohorts, create teams using Teams groups, also helping teachers being able to understand how to do that and add students and remove students is really important. It's something that we will touch on. But you've got things like the video content and the lesson streaming and recording, of course, which is, default to Teams. We've got assessments and assignments. So we've got dedicated assignments feature in Teams, but it also works really well with other tools such as OneNote and Forms, etc. You've also got the inclusive learning piece. So that a lot of those features are default within Teams. And then lastly is the analytics. So we've got a new Insights tab, which is just phenomenal in what it's able to do. You can get individual teacher views across their classes, but you can also get leader views through the Insights tab, where they can actually see across schools and they can see across cohorts and across classes as well. So it's doing some amazing stuff. It's not doing everything that your dedicated student information system or learning management system is going to be able to do, but it certainly works very well with those. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Troy. So what I'll do now is just take you through a little bit more on Microsoft Teams. And I did forget to mention earlier, actually, if there's any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat window. As Troy and I pass from one to the other, we'll kind of keep an eye on that and make sure that we can respond to any questions that you do have. So, but look, Teams really is a critical piece of Microsoft 365 these days. And it's because Teams really is a little bit more than just chat and meetings and voice calling. We have also in there some education capabilities. So Troy very briefly touched on that, how we're seeing some organizations, some educational organizations, schools, TAFEs, etc., starting to look at delivering assignments and grade books via Teams as well, typically if they don't have an existing learning management system in place. But ultimately, Teams really is going to be the place where we see people going to do much of their work. So I've heard the term Cloud OS bandied around a little bit. I'm not quite sure it's exactly that, but it certainly is a single place to go and find the information, find the tools and applications and services that you need to do your everyday work, whether that be teaching, learning, or on the administrative side of a business. So we have a bunch of inbuilt services in Teams. You may well be familiar with these. Ranging across chat, calls, and meetings. We have those Teams groupings backed with document management in SharePoint. We have those assignments and grading capabilities in the education version of Teams. And that's possibly one important thing to note is the education version of Teams is different to the version you would get in another government organization or in a commercial entity. So it does have some extra features that we package up just for education. In addition to that, Teams is also the place where we surface up, the power of those Office 365 or Microsoft 365 apps as well. So the integration is out of the box. It's really, really straightforward to embed a form or bring a spreadsheet or a Power BI dashboard into your Teams environment to enrich that, meaning that you don't have to jump out from your collaborative platform in Teams off to another application to start looking at information in that dashboard, spreadsheet, presentation, or form. So really, really important that it aggregates that information together. We also see it as an aggregation point for third-party applications as well. So bringing those in and mixing and merging them with the capabilities of native capabilities of Teams and the best of Microsoft 365. So, there are 700 plus applications available that integrate directly with Teams. And an area where we're working most closely with some of the other education providers is integration with learning management systems. So we're working very strongly with Canvas and Blackboard and Moodle and the sort of world-leading learning management systems providers, around the globe to bring their applications into Teams and to also bring Teams into their applications. So if you happen to be working in that learning management system and you want to create an online meeting, that online meeting is automatically created in Teams. So what's best done in Teams, what's best done in the learning management system will depend on according to your particular scenario, but ultimately it's a way of being able to sort of seamlessly navigate between the two. In addition to that, over on the right-hand side, we have our ability to build out custom applications and workflows as well. So sitting underneath Microsoft Teams is the Power Platform. This allows us to build sort of low-code, no-code capabilities for things like forms and workflow and little applications for just enhance productivity and sort of improve the way you automate business process as well. So with the inbuilt capabilities, the best of Microsoft 365, third-party applications, and effectively a blank canvas to build all those custom apps and workflows, Teams really becomes that central place where everything is brought together and into a single digital hub. So in practical terms, what does that look like? Well, I've got here an example of a team. It's a class team in a school environment, and I just wanted to run through where all the different components come from, just to demonstrate the point I made on the previous slide. So we have things like our Exchange Online Calendar that's surfaced up through Teams. There's deep integration into that calendaring service in Exchange. We have our file storage. Now that's sitting in OneDrive and SharePoint, all of which is built on the SharePoint platform. So wherever we're dealing with files, we're actually seeing those uploaded and saved into that SharePoint repository, where we can take advantage of those enterprise content management features, version control, etc. We also have all the bits that used to be Skype for Business. Sorry, let me just mute this phone. Somebody's clearly desperate to get hold of me. Right, that's off now. So all those bits that used to be Skype for Business that are now sort of brought into Teams. So that's things like the chat, the telephony, the ability to undertake online meetings as well, video conferencing, etc. Have all been subsumed into Teams, and we're well past the point of feature parity with what was Skype for Business Online, and that is retiring in 3 days' time. We also have access across the top here. We can add in a separate tab, and we can bring in natively any of those Microsoft applications. They're all built-in integrations, so there's no need to do any work there. Just simply hit the plus sign, find the application you want, and bring it in. And we also have integration to the things like OneNote Class Notebook, which are widely used in the classroom to distribute curriculum to students and also to provide feedback to those students in real time. Those other education-specific pieces, so assignments and gradebooks, also baked into the Teams for Education class capabilities, and we have third-party application integration as well. So that's a visual representation then of how we pull together the best of the native Teams capabilities with the best of Microsoft 365 and all of those third-party applications. And with that, I'll just hand over to Troy to talk us through a little bit on creating teams and a process that you might need to support your educators and leaders through.
Thanks, Richard. I will geek out a little bit as well that the Teams sound quality and bitrate it's just about to be upped. I think they're moving from something called Silk over to something called Satin, and it's going to be a much richer sound if you're not already on that. That sort of excited me a little bit. So when we think about the teams and the kind of teams that you can create in an education environment, we've got the class team sitting over there on our left, and that just like the other kinds of teams, it creates the team, it creates a SharePoint site, but it creates a unique OneNote class notebook, which is very much a teaching and learning tool for teachers and students to be able to use, a little bit beyond the scope of what we're going to do today, but trust me, it's awesome, and there's a full integration there. It creates unique teacher and student permissions, okay, so what the teachers can do and what the students can do in that space, and education-specific features like Richard was talking about before, the assignments features and other things like that. Now, right over on the other far right-hand side, we have the other team, and that creates the team and a unique SharePoint site. This is the default kind of team that people outside of education get. We call it other in the education space. This is going to be your second most important team. So obviously the class team is going to be used with students, and anything where the teaching and learning is going on, that's the kind of team you would use. Over on the other section, this is because it doesn't create a unique notebook and it doesn't lock down what you can do with OneNote. It is our suggestion that when you're looking at staff teams, and I know that sounds counterintuitive because right next door to it we have something called a staff team, but when you're creating staff teams, collaborative teams, use and burn project teams, you can see their clubs and study groups, after school activities, etc. You just have a greater level of granularity in terms of what you can do with OneNote and other tools as well. So it is actually our recommendation that when you're creating your whole staff teams, your faculty teams, don't be led astray by the idea of creating staff teams. Instead, be using other. So just to summarize that, class teams for students, other teams for everything else. Those two in the middle, you've got a professional learning community team and a staff team, which create a unique kind of notebook, but it is very, very narrow and very unique. So certainly there are uses for it, but you're going to find the majority of teams that you're going to want to create a class team and other team. And what's important to stress is that when you create a class team, a professional learning team, or a staff team, because it creates these kind of notebooks, it locks down your ability to integrate OneNote even further. And people get quite frustrated by that at times, whereas the other one doesn't, right? So that may not mean anything to you too much now, but later on, when staff are creating teams and they come to you and say, why can't I bring my OneNote in? You can remember everything that I said to you in this moment. Thanks, Rich. So it's really important that when you create a team, let me start again. It's really important that when you create a team that you note there's two kinds that you can create, a private and a public team. Now, when you create a class team, they are automatically private. All right, so we can't accidentally create class teams and have them, visible to everyone. So private teams mean you need permission to join. It will not be seen in your public department team space when you go to join or create other teams, but public will. Okay, so public will actually see, anybody in the organization can see it and join. So we just want you to steer you away from creating public teams. There really should be no need for you at a school level to create a public team. Just think that your default is private, and so stick with that. Unless there's something you want to add to that, Richard.
No, I think generally speaking, the notion of having 200,000 potential members of any given team, not much good will come from that in a school's environment. So yeah, absolutely right, Troy. Let's stick with the private teams unless there's absolutely a reason to go with the public one. Yeah,
cool. All right. So a couple of things to remember. First rule of thumb is in your team's environment. If you're going to start to build teams or continue to build teams in your schools, as few teams as necessary. All right, now that's hopefully really obvious why, because the more teams we have, the more channels we have, there's just more locations for people to find where was that chat, where was that file stored, etc. So we want to make sure that we keep as few teams as possible. And when you think about all these disparate locations that you have now, right? In your school, you may have a little bit of, Google Drive. You may have a little bit of Dropbox. You may have a shared drive. You may, on-prem shared drive. You may have, multiple SharePoint sites, etc. Creating more teams just adds to that. What we really want to do is we want to bring everything into as fewer teams as possible. Thanks, Rich. So I want to show you what this looks like, and I'll just get you to build that out for me, Rich. We've got basically 3 stages in a primary. So those of you that are working in primary schools, let me share this with you first, and then I'll take you through some other models. The first thing to note is that we have an all-staff team. It's a central place for all staff to communicate and collaborate, a location for secure file storage, and also a place to focus on those different domains, right? So year level teaching groups, professional learning teams, curriculum groups, etc. So the curriculum is all happening in that all-staff team, as well as the operations. Then you've got a leadership and admin team. So again, place for the leadership to communicate and collaborate, sensitive file storage, and also allows for, and both teams do, of course, allow for private channels, but you're going to find much more of a use for private channels in that stage too. Then when we look over at what we do with the kids, we've got class teams, all right? So each class in each year level would have their own dedicated team so that they can use things like OneNote class notebook and assignments, etc. But the other thing that we've seen is people have very much spoken to us about how do we bring our students together? How do we bring them together, whether it's, lower primary, upper primary, whole school, etc. So I want to also recommend that using those other kinds of teams, you might actually create whole student teams or band teams, right? Meaning, upper primary, lower primary, or grade 5 and 6, or just grade 6. And so it's for larger groups to come in for teaching and learning events. Again, curriculum, resources, learning engagements, operational files, etc., that the kids are going to access are all in that space, and also supporting the online hybrid delivery. So the difference between the class team is one individual class, 6B, 6D, whatever, whereas a student band team would be something like all of grade 6 or upper primary or lower primary. I'll get you to build out that last little bit there, Richard, and I'll get you to speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Before I do, just perhaps a comment on the role of the school technician and technology leaders here is, it's a critical piece getting these structures right. So Troy and I have spent the last 18 months working with schools on what does this typically look like. So this is the distilled wisdom of that time. So please take note of these and please be available to advise, because if you compare a well-structured teams channels deployment with people just randomly creating things, it's really good to have that structured piece. By all means, let them go and do their own thing as well. But I think having that structured framework in place really helps get this stuff off the ground. So if you think of it in terms of a file store back in the day, just building a structured hierarchy is really, really helpful, rather than just letting people create, new folder number 1, new folder number 2, etc. So really, really strong role for the team on the call today to play here. But just that bottom layer here, underpinning all of these teams, we have those common capabilities that go right across the board that the department looks after. So we're aggregating those applications together. We've got it cloud-based, so this is available anywhere on any device. So we switched to remote schooling like you did last week. all of a sudden you've got 25,000 extra users in your Teams environment, not a problem. The cloud can handle that for you. But it's also underpinned with that enterprise security and compliance. So all the goodness of user-based security, things like conditional access, we can have retention policies, e-discovery, litigation hold, all those kind of things that mean that you can go back and audit what's happened within that platform, should you need to do so at some point in the future.
Yeah, so looking at it from a primary model, you see we've got our staff team, we've got our leadership team, we maybe have that all students team, and then each individual class would have their, you can see there I've got 6G and 1C down the bottom. You would have multiple, of course, class teams. And then we've got the idea, if you wanted to have just a grade 6 band where you bring all your grade 6s together, remember those band teams are on top of the individual class teams, because their teams is not designed for groups of students together. When you want to start using things like OneNote, Class Notebook, and the assignments features, it really is designed with the idea of each class team is an individual class. Thanks, Richard. So when you look at a secondary model, you've got an all-staff team that's very, very similar, except we're moving faculties out of that because faculties in a secondary model need a greater level of granularity. Leadership and admin, very, very similar. Coming over to faculty teams, it's a central place for faculty groups to communicate. So you would have faculty of science, faculty of maths, faculty of English, etc. We'll have a look at that in a minute. But they do need a greater level of granularity. They do need those multiple channels, especially when we start to mix, SACE, year 11 and 12 into the picture, because we've got, within science, we've got physics, bio, chem, not just year levels. And so we've moved the faculties out of the all-staff team. The all-staff team becomes more about operations and not about curriculum. Class teams, again, very similar, except there's going to be a whole lot more because the cohorts change and the teachers change, unlike primary. So, a secondary year 7 student is going to have a science team, a maths team, an English team, a PE team, etc. They're going to have multiple teams, whereas the primary model, that student just has the one. And then we've got those student bands again, and that's really for a school to decide how they're going to build that out and reflecting on how the school really does business, right, with the students. Obviously, it sits on all that Office aggregation, cloud-based enterprise security compliance that Richard spoke about. So when we look at there, we can see a staff team, a leadership team, then we've got our faculty teams right across there, and then we've got those individual class teams and also those band teams. Now, when we think about an R to 12 structure, and I realize you guys have thrown me for a loop, now you're talking about B to 12, we could certainly have another stage in there where we would have our early learning centre staff. Certainly we wouldn't be setting up class teams for our early learning centres. Even we're not that optimistic for your kids yet, but nevertheless, you would just throw in there, in stage 1 or stage 2 or even stage 3, you may actually just build another team in there. But primary and secondary in an R to 12 structure, they will need dedicated teams because they do use different curriculum, and oftentimes even in an R to 12 school, they will be quite separate in the way that they function. But if your school wants to do business in a different way, 100% you could merge those together if that worked for you. We've still got secondary faculties as well, and then we've got our class teams and our band teams, and then lastly, sitting on all that aggregation that we talked about before. So in an R to 12 structure, if you could jump for me, Rich, it's going to look a lot more, you've got a lot more teams, obviously, because you've got you've just got a much larger school, and a lot more differentiation is required in there. But remembering we've still got that all staff team. So everybody in the school is able to get whole school announcements and policy documents and those kinds of things, but we're still able to break away into our primary space, our secondary space, and our faculty spaces for secondary as well. Thanks, Richard. So what I might do is lastly, I do want to speak to this, and this is what Richard was saying before. It is really important that this team structure piece is managed well. Once upon a time, a lot of this kind of stuff would have been handled directly by yourselves as techies. It would have been, we're going to set this up and structure this. Because of the fact that this needs a whole school adoption, you do need to bring executive class within the school, principals, assistant principals, curriculum. These other people need to be involved in this strategy. I'm sorry, Richard, if you can just jump back for me. Need to be involved in this strategy. So what we're offering at the moment is we're offering 2-hour workshops to schools and again, we would want your leadership to be involved, your curriculum people to be involved, yourselves, of course, to come along, and we run a 2-hour strategy building workshop. So it's not so much about how to use Teams and click here, click there. It's more about let's build those structures. Let's look at those models that I just shared with you. And we break them down. We talk about the why. So if this is something that you think your school would like to be involved in, please reach out to me. My email address is there. We can have a bit of a chat, make sure that we're all on the same page, and then we can set a 2-hour session for your group within your school. It is hugely popular, these workshops, so please reach out now so we can book in advance. But what's happening with those is schools are looking at it, and those that are already on the Teams road are using this workshop to bring things back and streamline, and those that haven't jumped into the space are using it to get the structure. So it's really useful whether you're wild in Teams already or whether you haven't quite stepped into that space. So again, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help your school. The only caveat I put on there is that we need to make sure that we have the right people involved. So it's not just sharing with one section of the school. We need to make sure that everybody that's a part of that is a part of that session. Okay, so let's jump into that. So Richard, I might actually share if you don't mind.
Sounds good.
So I will, let me know you guys can see that, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I just want to show you quickly, and now I'm assuming that most people are right across the right across Teams, at least to a large degree. Obviously, it's that sort of social media-esque environment that people are already using to communicate. I talk to teachers and I say, when was the last time you emailed a friend or a family member? Largely, you don't. You're using email for external communications to the bank or to the, to the RACQ, RACV, or whatever you guys call it in your state. It's those external organisations, but internally in our social lives, we tend to use social media. So that's what Teams does. It brings that sort of social media style experience, and people are really used to this. So it's not a lot of learning for them to do, but we've got our activity tab up here. So if I've got new activity notifications, just like in Facebook, I click on that, it's going to take me into my, my latest, greatest stuff, and there'll be hopefully multiple things there. We've got the ability to have private chat. We've got the teams themselves. Okay, so we can go and have a look at those in a moment. We've got the assignments features, the calendar, calling, and also your individual files, right? So your OneDrive, but also the Teams files that you have access to across different teams. So if I was a teacher and I was going to come in and have a look at my staff team, you can see here, this is a primary model, but you can see here I've got all my channels. Each channel has a section for posts, for transparent chat. All right, so we can see we've got notifications, questions that are being asked. It's going to reduce your email, your internal email, because people are able to have much easier group discussions and group chats in that, or group posts. If I had a question that I didn't know I had, if I'm following a channel, that I'll be notified of it, etc. And each channel also has its file space. All right, so you can see here in this general channel, we've got curriculum documents and policy documents, etc. for the whole school. We're suggesting that you migrate your shared drive into Teams, of course, because that is going to increase your ability to back things up, for teachers and students to be able to look at previous versions of files. They can work collaboratively on documents, etc. You can also see that we've got our LMS. Anything that has a web portal can be brought directly into Teams, so they've got their LMS in there, and depending on where they are in the team would be where the URL that you would use and what landing point you come into. And then when we look down here, we can see we've got things like the library and facilities and grounds, ICT support. If you've got a ticketing system that's web-based, that can actually be built into there as well. Parent communications, the professional learning teams, etc. When I come down here into year one, for example, you can see that the year one team, they've been communicating with each other. They've got their curriculum info. They've got their LMS, which is sitting up here. They've got the tabs directly to the Australian curriculum. They've got their planner documents, but of course they've also got their files, right? So once upon a time, this was the shared drive, but now they've moved all that into that space. But what's important to note is we put everybody in the same team because we want them to collaborate. We want them to be able to, you know, for year one to see what year two are doing, to be able to talk to each other. So, you know, the idea of having year one having its own team, year two having its own team is going to stifle collaboration and communication. So the idea is to bring them all together. When we look at the leadership team, we can see again they've got their direct link to, you know, to the leadership relevant pages within their LMS. They've got these other areas down here for, you know, facilities, finance, human resources, etc. And some of those channels are locked because they want, you know, that security, that granularity of security, and being also able to making sure that only the right people are there. All right. And so you won't see these channels. It's not like you're reminded that you're locked out of these things. If you're not invited, you simply won't see them. The other thing I guess I want to stress is we've got the ability to add our tabs. Okay, so we've got our first party apps, but also all our third party apps. And again, remember, you can also bring in a website as well. When we look at our student teams, a little bit different in primary to secondary, but just really quickly pointing out across all our teams, we've got that class notebook integration. We've got our assignments. Teachers are able to look at grades and be able to look at some of that data through the insights, etc. And of course, teachers can throw their own stuff across the top here. And these tabs are dynamic, not static, so we can be changing them according to lessons. Each one of these classes have got, you know, all the subjects that the kids are involved in. So Chinese, literacy, maths, performing arts, etc. The teachers are all a member of this. Anybody who teaches this grade are a member, and they've got their own teacher-only area to talk specifically about the classes. We may have learning enhancement, which may be a group of students that are coming in to do some special work. That can happen in there, and so, you know, those students are invited into that space. When I look at some of my, let me just grab a class, excuse me, I'm going to just grab quickly a secondary team. So a secondary class team is going to look very different to primary because it's one subject at a time. As I said before, I will be following multiple channels, multiple teams if I'm a student, whereas if I'm a primary, I'll just have the one. But nevertheless, you can see they've broken it down according to how the teacher wants to set this up. So they've set it up. She set up a social and play space so they can go in there and, you know, muck around. That's fine. They need that, she thinks, but they're working on the book, The Outsiders, and then they've got their units that are broken down. Now, that's entirely up to the teacher how that wants to be set up. It could be set up week at a time. It could be set up, you know, entirely up to the teacher, but still got that class notebook integration, still got the ability to do assignments, and also to be looking across the grades in there as well. We will 100% for teachers take them into a much deeper dive and show them the assignments features, what it looks like to set those class teams up. But Richard and I thought it was really important that you understand this is what the teachers are going to be exposed to. This is what they're going to be asking for. So it might be worth your time to make sure that you have a bit of an understanding of teams from a teacher's perspective, not just from a technical perspective. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Troy. So we're about an hour in, so we've covered a huge amount in that time. A lot of it setting the scene, a lot of it, looking at Teams as the digital hub. So it's probably worth us taking a quick break now. So we'll probably run maybe 10 minutes break or till 10 past Adelaide time, when we'll come back and we'll dive into the next section where we start to talk a little bit more about those client-side pieces. A little bit on installing Teams clients, a little bit on updating browsers, etc. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 10 past Adelaide time. So any questions in the meantime, please drop them in the chat window, and we'll see you in actually 9 minutes now. So look forward to that very shortly. Okay, so we're bang on 10 past 11, so we'll dive back into the second half. As I mentioned, any questions, please drop in the chat window or come off mute or pop your hand up. We'll be more than happy to answer those. So we're going to continue with the presentation, a little bit of a change of gear now. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those elements that we need to ensure are up and running in our teachers' environments so they can take advantage of Microsoft 365 in the classroom. The first piece I wanted to touch on really was around the Teams client. So the Teams client can be installed either standalone as an application, or it can come as part of Microsoft 365 apps. So if it's sort of standalone, typically it's done, by user installation, I suppose. Download the exe. If it's going to be delivered sort of more as a centralized pushed out application, we typically see that pushed out as an MSI. Once it's out there, though, most importantly, is an evergreen application, so it will automatically update on the client. Now, there's I'll put a link in the that's showing. It's not showing on this slide for some reason, but there is actually a link up here in the top right-hand corner to the IT Admins Academy for Teams. So it's a collection of really helpful and useful videos that can help you through some of those installation questions you may have about how things update, etc. We've also got the link here, the obligatory link to docs.microsoft.com, which again provides you with a whole bunch of resources. But ultimately, once you've got it out there, whether that be a standalone installation or an IT-driven installation or as part of Microsoft 365 apps, it's kind of set and forget because the updates will all apply automatically. Troy, I'm just going to throw to you now just to talk a little bit about Teams client settings and notifications.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Look, it's another thing that's really important to note, and again, I will certainly speak about this in depth with that middle leader train the trainer session. But the Teams client settings around notifications are really important. There are some very, I think, low-level whole tenant applications, settings, policies that you can set, but largely that's going to be managed by Flinders Street rather than at a school level. So it's really important that we teach teachers how to set their own notifications. Now, it's really important, again, to note that if the notifications are too high, it becomes white noise and teachers will actually switch off from it and miss out on important information. But if the notifications are too low, then obviously they're not going to be able to get those notifications either. So making sure that people know how to change their settings, okay? And it's simply in the Teams client, you just click on the settings wheel and you can go in there and change your settings. And at the beginning of using Teams, we may want our notifications to be quite high. And by doing so, we're making sure that we're new to it, we're not missing bits and pieces, but then later as we get into Teams more, we become more used to it and we can dial those down. So making sure that people know how to do that, how to do it themselves, and it is very much a personal choice and a personalization of that. We can also follow and unfollow channels. So obviously when we're looking at at our Teams, we can hover over the ellipses and hide a channel. And when a channel is hidden, then the notifications are switched off. And when a channel is shown, then the notifications come back on, right? And that's our global or our client settings. But we can also hover over the ellipses and we can turn individual channels up. So if I'm as a teacher and I'm thinking, okay, I need to know what's going on in the library because I'm doing a lot of work in that space, I can turn those channels up, individual channel up, regardless of what my whole settings are. The other thing to remember is that people can @mention, and again, people are used to this in the sort of Facebook environment or in the Twitter environment. So being to @mention a person, @mention an entire channel, and @mention an entire team where when required and when necessary is key. Another thing I guess I want to stress is that you can save posts, right? So people oftentimes will write to me and say, oh, it gets lost in the chat. How do I access that? Hover over the ellipses, you can save a post, and you can also, make a post or a chat message unread again, so you can make sure that notification is there. People are doing this already on Facebook. So making sure that they know how to do this in Teams is going to improve their experience. Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, and I suppose, Troy, what we get there is a bit of pull and a bit of push as well. So you subscribe to certain channels. When a post is made to that channel, you get a ding in the top left-hand corner in the activity. But also, if somebody app mentions it, they're kind of pushing a notification to you, so they can app mention you by person, channel, or team, as Troy says. So my view on Teams, I'm very much guided by notifications in the top left-hand corner, unless I'm off looking for something in a particular channel of interest. So yeah, if the bell doesn't ding, then I'm probably not going to see it. Is my rule of thumb. Got a few tips and tricks as well here. Some of the things that we've gathered over the past few years working in Teams for Education. So the first one's a bit of a gotcha. It's not a critical gotcha, but it's something that can be a little bit annoying, and that's about naming teams and channels. Because as we create those teams, the SharePoint library that's created in the background is created with the same name. If we then rename that team, the SharePoint library will not be renamed alongside it. So I know that's something we're working on in the background to make that a bit more feature rich, but it's a little bit painful if you have for example, I have a team internally that I use with my colleagues to collaborate around the Department for Education in South Australia. You guys were called DECD when we first started working with you. So that team is now called Department for Education, but the SharePoint library is still called DECD. So just a bit of a gotcha to avoid that. The second one is a tip, and that's really about understanding meeting roles for team meetings. So as I mentioned, we did have a little situation last week where there was a bit of tightening up that needed to be done on Teams policies, and that was actually implementing a fix to change the default meeting roles for Teams. So there's a link there to click through on that will help you understand what the difference is between being a meeting owner, a meeting presenter, and then a meeting attendee. So in an education environment, typically we recommend that students are attendees and teachers are presenters, and that infers a whole bunch of other settings onto how people can interact with that meeting, how they appear in the lobby, whether they can let people in from the lobby, etc., etc., etc. So critical that you understand those roles, because if things are happening not quite as expected within a Teams meeting, it's probably because people have either elevated or reduced levels of permission within that team based on the role in the meeting. So remember, organisers or owners, presenters, and then attendees. The other gotcha we've got here is on channel creation. So as you've built your team and you're building out those channels, we have private channels, which are those kind of ones that come with a lock, where you can limit the access to a subset of people within the team, or public channels, which are open to everybody within the team. Now, at the moment, there is no facility to change from public to private. So if you do make something a public channel and you wanted to turn it into a private channel, you'd have to delete and recreate. So again, just a little niggle, but let's try and get it right first time. And then the final tip really is, to try and make sure your teams have at least 2 owners. If somebody leaves the organization, notifications will still be going to that person. The team will become orphaned if we're not careful. So try and keep it to sort of 2 or 3 owners per team. We don't want 15 people owning a team. It gets a bit cumbersome, but definitely more than 1 as well. And then a little trick at the end is, there is a self-serve capability within Teams for Help. So do point your teachers and your educators and leaders to the help button in the bottom corner of Teams. There's a lot of useful information in there. They can go and self-serve a little bit. So that was what we wanted to cover off on Teams and the client installation and configuration options that are available to you. Next up, we're just going to talk a little bit about browsers. So again, it's another one of those sort of things that doesn't pop up too often, but there's been a bit of movement in this space. So this slide was actually taken from last year, around August timeframe, when we were looking at the impending end of service of Internet Explorer 11. And the older version of Microsoft Edge, so the pre-Chromium version. You can see the timeline here. We're very much right down at the right-hand side of this now. So, we're no longer supporting Teams in IE 11. Full support for M365 stops in, about 3 weeks' time. And we're no longer supporting Microsoft Edge, the older version, so only the Chromium version is supported. So the short version of all this is, you don't want to be having people using Internet Explorer 11. You don't want people using the old version of Edge in your environment. They should really all be moved through to the latest version of Edge Chromium. So can't be much clearer than that. So if there are people out in your environment using those legacy browsers, we need to switch them over. Troy, I'll probably hand over to, oh, sorry, just a little bit on the installation of Edge Chromium. So there's a few ways that you can deploy Edge, aside from individual users kind of, browsing the web and downloading setup.exe. It is available as an MSI package, so it can be distributed via Endpoint Configuration Manager or Intune, or indeed any other existing software deployment tools that you use to deliver an MSI package. We are working with the department on getting Intune ready to roll more broadly to schools. So we're hoping to see that sort of later in the year. It's also included in the more recent versions of Windows 10. So everything from Windows 10 release 20H2 onwards, or for previous versions of Windows, so sort of 1709 through to 2004, if you've still got those in your environment, it's available as Windows updates. There's a slight note on the bottom version, Windows, the 2004 version. We did release an initial KB for that one, but that was replaced subsequently. So just make sure you're using the latest and most current version. So different options depending on how you'd like to see it rolled out. So included in the more recent version of Windows 10 as Windows Update or as an individual application pushed out via your software deployment tool of choice. So just talking about Edge for education. So this is the Edge Chromium version, and just taking you through why we think this is the best browser for this type of environment. Firstly, on the left-hand side, we have amazing compatibility. So we've sort of learned from the past there when we sort of tried to build our own engine for the older version of Edge. So we've taken the Chrome open source engine that delivers the best compatibility with websites and all those extensions that people like to see as plugins to their browser. We've made it available across all the major platforms, so Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, etc. So it really is a truly cross-platform solution in terms of compatibility with the client systems, compatibility with websites, but we've also built in an Internet Explorer 11 mode for compatibility with some older applications. So we do know there are still applications out there, typically line of business applications, running in environments like the departments that were built with Internet Explorer in mind. So as you hit those sites, we can configure the Edge browser through some enterprise settings to automatically switch into IE11 compatibility mode. So there should be no reason why you can't move away from IE11 now that it's sort of decreasingly supported by the Microsoft toolset. We also have the controls, security and management that you'd expect from Microsoft. So we have more than 200 policies available with a whole bunch of things like privacy controls to prevent tracking. Look, there's some great guidance as well on how to configure Edge for education on docs.microsoft.com. We've linked to that. But in terms of how the productivity tools for the classroom work, Troy will take us through a few of those educational features in a demo shortly. But first, I'll hand to Troy. He'll talk a little bit about accessibility. This is one of his real passions. So Troy, over to you again.
It helps to turn my microphone on. Thanks, Richard. So thinking about accessibility, we really have delivered. Microsoft really have delivered in terms of that extra level of support to the students, as I was saying before, and the fact that it was that it's now right across the Microsoft stack, and a lot of these features are right across the Microsoft stack, and then that Microsoft. Sorry, my dogs are just about to eat my lunch. Yeah, I'm going to move that. Thank you very much. And the fact that the Microsoft tools are so ubiquitous across school and across the workforce, etc., makes that a really compelling story. Thanks, Rich. So just a few things to note. We're not talking about special schools. We are certainly including them in this, but it's not just narrowly about special schools or special programs within schools. It's about everyone. So up to 50% of instructional time can be lost managing students' needs, including assistive technology, right? I'm not saying those student needs aren't important, but wouldn't it be great if we could actually have the technology working and things that are, switched on and ready to go and saving that teacher time, and they can focus on the teaching and learning. We know that virtually 100% of schools in Australia have students with identified learning difficulties enrolled. 20% of students in Australian schools require inclusive education support. And about 25% of Australian students are from a language background other than English. So this slide is to really show you that your school is about inclusivity. Your school is about equity. Your school is about disabilities. Your school is about making sure that all students get a fair go. So it's important again to note that this messaging is not just for a small group of students in your school. It's for a big chunk. Thanks, Rich. So our inclusive classroom tools are designed to give students more personalised access to the curriculum. It's to optimise educator time, to make it easier for educators, and it's also to improve learning outcomes, right? Which is that business of teaching and learning, business of schools is about, does it impact student learning? So we want to make sure that students have an increased independence and a reduction of stigma. So we're not talking about special technology. We're not talking about special devices. We're talking about the same software as everybody else in the room and the same device as everybody else in the room. Again, we want to make sure that educators are more empowered to engage every learner, but also optimizing their time. And then schools get a really good reputation when this stuff is switched on and it's used right across the school. Then within the community, the school has a great reputation for, promoting equity and inclusion. Thanks, Rich. So we have these four main areas: reading support, writing support, math support, and speaking and listening. I will unpack this in depth for the teachers in the Inclusive Classroom Day, but we thought it'd be really important to show you what this can look like. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a tool called Immersive Reader. Hopefully some of you have seen this before. I'll just start sharing my screen again. Just give me a moment.
I think there's a critical role here for IT technicians and technology leaders to play in making sure that teachers in schools are able to switch this stuff on. It's pretty straightforward to do, but so often gets forgotten. So it's a really critical role that we can push how the technology can help in this set of scenarios.
That's exactly right. And also what's going to happen is a lot of your teachers are going to come to you and say, hey, we want this. Is this switched on? There's nothing more frustrating, I think, sometimes than teachers get really excited about what we're doing. They go back to their techie and the techie says no, not because the techie is necessarily, doing anything that they shouldn't or anything like that. It's just that they don't understand the value of it, right? And so, and they've got other priorities, maintaining security or whatever is going on. So we just want to make sure that you're on the same page with your teachers. So here I am inside Teams. So I could be inside a classroom team and I'm a grade 3 student and I'm looking at a piece of text. Now the teacher has just put that document out. They're not having to create special documents for numerous students. And this is where we talked about that saving teacher time. So that the teacher has made one document, but the student gets to personalize. And there's a lot of things that they could do, but I'm just going to show you one just to give you a taste of what that looks like. So up here in the View tab, so we're inside Word, inside Teams, okay? So I click on the View tab and I come over here to Immersive Reader. I click on Immersive Reader and Word has vanished. And what we might want to do for the student is we want to go into whole screen view so that all the other bells and whistles and distractions are gone as well. Now, what we see here is we see the document is black on a white background. Once the student sets this on his or her device, then the profile will remember these settings, all right? But I've dialed it all back because I want to show you what it looks like as we sort of set this up. So the first thing we do is we come over here to text preferences and we can increase and decrease the text size. And we can also increase and decrease the text spacing, right, which is really important for things like visual crowding, etc. And I've just realized that I forgot to share my sound, so I'm just going to reshare. The student can change to 3 very simple fonts. Primary Teacher's favorite, Comic Sans, is there as well. They can change the theme, all right? So they can be very trendy and be in dark mode, or depending on the light in the room, even a bit of fun, they can be changing it according to what they need. And they can also turn on and off the source formatting. So bold, underline, italics can be a distraction for some students. So see, I turn it on and the bold reappears, strike through, etc. So if I switch that off, that distraction is removed. Now what happens is when I come to a word, this is the student, right? So she set it the way that she wants it. It's big enough for her to see. When she comes to a word that she doesn't know, she can click on that word and she can listen to it as well.
Holidays. Holidays.
All right. So she's able to read along. She gets stuck on a word.
sprayed,
All right, she can get that. Now, what she can do as well, though, is she might actually want the entire document played to her, all right, because she may have decoding issues. So she just clicks here on play.
Last Christmas holidays I played with my puppy Brandy. I sprayed water at her. I wrestled her and I played soccer with her. We sat down together, we said jokes to each other, we played and played until I had to go into the house and eat lunch.
All right, now you hear it's a nice, natural sounding Aussie accent. We've got the voice settings here so we can speed it up and slow it down. Aussie at the moment only has a female voice, but some of the other accents and languages actually have a male voice as well. All right, so that can be slowed down, that can be sped up. Now, another thing that the student could do is they could syllabify, and that means that they're breaking the words down. So if any of you have got your own kids and you're teaching them how to read, we know that we chunk words, right? So when we get to multi-syllable words, we break it down like eating, soccer, etc. So it'll do that for them. It'll also highlight the parts of speech. So you can see when I highlight my nouns, my verbs, my adjectives and my adverbs, I can change the colors if I have color differentiation issues. And if I really can't see the colors very well, I can show the labels, right? So now there we can see that the AI, now this is happening in real time, is actually determining which is a noun, which is a verb, which is a an adverb, etc. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger because I want to show you here. Have a look at when we've got here that I played tag with her. Tag is a noun, and then when she got to tag me, tag is a verb. So it's really quite a sophisticated AI, which is contextualizing those parts of speech according to the sentence. Right? So that's, you know, sometimes tag is a noun, sometimes tag is a verb, and the AI actually picks that up. I'm just going to switch those labels off for a moment. Now, the other thing we've got is line focus. So we've got 5, 3, and 1 line focus to reduce distractions even further. And we've also got a picture dictionary. So again, utilizing what teachers do by clicking on the picture dictionary. Now, when we click on a word, I can see it and hear it, and I'll also get picture prompts. All right. So not every word is going to have a picture dictionary, but this is updated from time to time and it grows more and more. I like this one. 2 meanings there for the word beat. One of my favorites. People oftentimes want me to click on Brandy. Unfortunately, there's nothing there. Translation is there as well, so we can translate into multiple languages. So for example, if I've got a student that is a Korean and maybe this Korean boy, his English is quite good, but occasionally he needs some help with certain words. Now, by clicking on the word translation, when he clicks on his word, he can see it and hear it in English.
holidays,
And see it and hear it in Korean.
휴가,
Okay, and then he could also have the entire document translated into Korean. Korean is one of our stronger languages, so it's still got parts of speech, it's still got the picture dictionary, etc. But it's a really nice, natural sounding Korean voice.
지난 크리스마스 휴가 나는 내 강아지 브랜디와 함께 연주. 나는 그녀에게 물을 뿌려 했다.
Okay, and you notice we can go backwards and forwards between the original document and the translation. So if I had a Korean document wanting to translate it into English, I could do exactly that. And the translation is actually really, really high. Now, that's Immersive Reader. A minute ago, it looked like this. Okay, now that the student has their settings, when I click on this, regardless of what the original document looked like, I'm going to see all my documents that have Immersive Reader in the same way, the same settings, everything's there for me to use. Now, what we did as well, coming into the Edge browser, is we've actually built the Edge browser with Immersive Reader as part of it. So we can see a document here, the phases of the moon. You can see that there's lots of graphics, there's lots of ads, colors, bells and whistles, buttons. For a lot of kids, it's going to do their head in because there's just too much for them to actually be able to navigate. And you can see even the graphics in between the picture, the text. It's just too much going on. So what we've done is with Immersive Reader, you can see it sits up here in the URL bar. I click on that and look at this. It opens up a version of Immersive Reader. Now, the cool thing about this is it only strips the side pictures and the pictures around. It doesn't strip the pictures from within the document, right? Because it's a website. Who wants to take the pictures away from that? I can read aloud, okay? So I can have that read to me.
the phases of the moon, Why does the moon change shape each night?
A nice sounding Aussie accent, but I could put that in multiple accents if I wanted to. But you can see I can change the speed. I could put that into multiple accents, multiple languages in there as well. Let me just switch that off. We've got text preferences as well. So text size, text spacing, the page themes that we saw before. It's the full immersive reader. We can syllabify, we can highlight our parts of speech again. That's all in there too. We've got our reading preferences, so I can have my 1, 3, and 5 line focus if I wanted. My picture dictionary is there when I click on a word. And then I've also got the ability to translate that into multiple languages, and we're talking a whole heap of languages there. And the Microsoft Translator API and AI is really very, very powerful. So while I'm here with you in Immersive Reader, I just want to show you a couple of very cool tools that live inside the Edge browser that are native. These aren't extensions that you need to add. First thing I want to stress, though, is what we've done is we've got what's called sleeping tabs. And sorry, I can't demo this for you without leaving these tabs for a little while. But what happens is after a period of time, and you can set what time you want that to be over in your profile settings, that they will actually switch these tabs, unused tabs, and put them to sleep. Okay, and by putting them to sleep, it's saving battery and also freeing up memory, right? Because as you know, multiple tabs mean that, you know, the device is taking up that memory. So it actually puts them to sleep. And as soon as you come and click on this, it will bring it back. So that's an under the hood feature that most people wouldn't realize is making a massive difference to the speed of their browsing experience, but also to the battery life of their computer and other apps at the same time. So that's in there. That's one of the first ones that I wanted to show you. Another thing that's really cool is we have this thing called collections. So you know how it is with your favorites. If you know you've got favorites and you've got directories and subdirectories and folders, etc., and it can be really hard to navigate, and especially if you're a child, but not even if you're a child, right? So I actually use these all the time myself. So when I come on here to collections, what happens is if I had these 4 pages here and I want to start a new collection, and I'm going to call this my DFE demo, just for a nice creative name. All right, so I create that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add all these pages, right? So I'm going to add my current page. Oops, excuse me. Come back here to my collection. I'm just going to pin that so it stays there so I can see it. I'm going to add this page as well. I'm going to add this page over here. Excuse me. All right. So what I can do there is I can add all the pages that I want to have. And now what happens is when I close my collections, right, instead of having to, you know, hunt through favorites and all that kind of thing, the student can actually just come back here to collections. They can see the list of their different collections. All right. So it can be used for research. It could be used for, yeah, and it's really easy to delete those and, you know, to build them, as you can see. But I come in here. This is my research that I'm doing here on the phases of the moon. And there's a whole heap of stuff that I can do, right? So I can, for example, create little notes, okay? And I can grab text and be putting that straight in there. I can also send this information to an Excel spreadsheet, a OneNote page, Word documents, even sending it to Pinterest, all right? And then there's different ways that I can sort and different ways that I can copy. But the thing that I like, which is probably not too impressive maybe for you guys, but if I close all this down, all right, and then I come back into my DFE demo, all right, and I want to open all those tabs, bang, it just opens up a new browser tab and it opens up all those tabs for me, all right? So that's another really cool feature that's in there. Another one that we've got is we've built in the math solver. Okay, so that's actually been built in. You have to switch this on. It's not an extension, but you do have to switch it on in the profile settings. But I'll just show you what that looks like. So if I come into here and say maths worksheets. So let's just grab some, let's just grab a maths worksheet, like something like this. Okay, and here we have, oh, that's not going to help me. Sorry, I'm going to go to images, would be easier. So here in images, I'm going to look at a maths equation. Okay, so here I have some maths equations, right? Let's go with this one here. Now what happens is when I turn on my math solver, okay, it allows me to, excuse me, select my maths problem. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to select this one here. Okay, now this is just from a graphic. I could have also done it from the handwritten one as well. Okay, and then I solve that. Okay, you can see it's turned that into text there. It's detected the maths problem. Oh, sorry, that's one that's actually got an error in it. So let me try a better one. Let's go with something like, let's go with this one here. Okay, so I'm going to again click on my maths problem there. I'm going to solve. Okay. I'm going to just imagine that, look guys, I'm not sure exactly what's happening with this demo at the moment. The demo gods are not smiling on me at the moment. This should be working. Nevertheless, what it would do was it would actually show you the solution, but it will show you step by step how to solve that as well. All right, so I'm just going to let the demo gods go on that one. But the other thing I want to share with you lastly is the ability to have multiple profiles. All right, so I work with multiple schools and multiple tenants. But what that means is I can go in and I can be accessing different unique profiles, different unique accounts, and have multiple accounts, right? So you can see here I've got my South Australian Department for Education account here, and that will open an entire browser environment just for my space in the DFE. So that means that it's going to remember my username and passwords and all that profile information. But then I've also got my personal space as well, so my Hotmail space. So it's like having multiple browsers. It's like having multiple browsers, but it's remembering within the one browser, remembering all that information that I need, such as, profile information, usernames, passwords, things that are unique to that space. So that's where I'm going to stop. But I do want to encourage you to make sure that people are using the latest, greatest version of Edge and make sure that that's pushed out. You can find that really easily by just, typing get Edge. And I share this with teachers as well. Get Edge browser, and then they'll actually be able to download specifically from here. Okay, thanks, Rich.
Wonderful, thanks, Troy. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the great educational features and the importance that they offer in the teaching and learning environment. So again, we're just going to switch gears here and just start to talk a little bit more about Microsoft 365 apps. So that's Office Pro Plus, or Office 365 Pro Plus, as you may know it, and the importance of keeping up to date and current with the latest flavor. So you'll be familiar with the kind of traditional release cycle of Microsoft products over the years. So you can see on the right hand side here, every 3 years, a new version of Office. What we're seeing, though, increasingly is that the pace of change within our Office solutions, whether they be the front end in the Rich Office client or the back end in Microsoft 365, means that if you are using those older kind of every 3 year versions of Office, you're actually falling behind. So, for example, if you were running Office 2016 in your environment, you're actually 4 years out of date. And if you're running Office 2019 in your environment, you're almost 18 months out of date. So we know the department team has included Microsoft 365 apps in the current build or current release of the SOE as default. But if we were to take a look at the next slide, and we take a look at some of those features that have been sort of released through that period, you can see each release from spring 2017 to autumn 2019 here. So these are Northern Hemisphere spring and fall. You can see the features in blue are building each time. So as the base in grey, those features builds over time. We're adding new capabilities every 6 months. Some really important ones. If you think back to 2016, we didn't have collaborative real-time editing. We didn't have the learning tools that Troy has just taken us through. We didn't have the translation capabilities. We don't have that ability to read aloud and listen to email. So some really important features that we've brought through in each of those releases. So it's super, super important that we try and get everybody on the same version and on the most current version, which is Microsoft 365 apps. So we don't really, unless absolutely necessary, want to see people out there running 2016 or 2019. So when it comes to deploying Office Pro Plus or Microsoft 365 apps, we've got a whole heap of different tools out there that are available. So we've provided a link here. We're not going to go in great depth. We'll talk a little bit more about the options available, but there's a link here. We can't cover all of the content today, but if you're in the process of looking at rolling out Microsoft 365 apps, we do have a little bit of guidance that we'll share today, and they really are around those key considerations for deployment. So how are you going to deploy Microsoft 365 apps in the first place? How are you going to manage those updates? What the implications are of the update channels. And again, we've got a few tips, tricks, and gotchas. So I'm not going to completely drain this slide and talk about every option here, but this does cover the various options for deploying Microsoft 365 apps and when to use which. It's got a little bit on the, the pros and cons, including the permissions that are required at the local client level, and the ability to, whether you can customize the components that you're pushing out or not. So fundamentally, it really is the case. If you have a management tool such as Config Manager or Intune in place, it makes sense to use that. So they're options 1 and 2 detailed here. So as I mentioned before, we're still piloting Intune with the department and hoping it will be more broadly available shortly. If you don't have a management tool in place and you want to install on a number of devices, you can use something called the Office Deployment Toolkit. You may or may not be familiar with that. And that can be used for either a local installation from a local share or can be used as a cloud-based installation. And there are sort of, bandwidth considerations there. So you're going to use a bit more bandwidth if you go cloud than you would if you're looking to deploy from a local installation share in your environment. Option 5 here is that self-service option. So what Troy showed before, encouraging or allowing your users to go to the Office 365 portal, hit the download button. They'll download a copy that's linked to the tenancy for the Department for Education in South Australia. The only challenge there is you're possibly going to end up with that multiple different versions in your environment. So we'd probably recommend a mass installation option. And then the final option is to build it into the base image. So the department has done this. But rather than re-imaging machines, we'd recommend you push out an updated version of Office, as and when required. So a few options there, a few considerations. If you do have access to a configuration manager or Intune, or you want to look at using the Office Deployment Toolkit and the customization toolkit that's freely provided on the website to install your Office 365 Pro Plus or Microsoft 365 apps from that local share, I can strongly recommend this interactive guide that's linked to here on this slide. It takes you through each of those options, whether it be Intune, SCCM or SCEM, and the Office Deployment Toolkit with some kind of click-through guide. So, I mean, if you're relatively new to deploying Office 365 apps or Microsoft 365 apps at scale, it's a really useful guide. Or if you just want a refresher on the options available, there might be some things you're missing out on there that could save you a little bit of time. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Once we have the M365 apps out there and deployed, we need to think about updating. So there's a few options for updating again with pros and cons. What we often see is the top one here is people updating now directly from the internet. It's probably the most common option we see selected. So it requires minimal administrative effort. Works really well when people are working or learning remotely, such as you have been for the last week or two, or we did for an extended period in Victoria, and they're going to be for an extended period in New South Wales. But you don't really have too much control over the update process. So if you do need to control that process in a little more detail, then you'd be looking at using something like a Config Manager or the Office Deployment Toolkit. Stored and configured with GPOs are probably the best options there. So a few different options. We're seeing increasing amounts of people saying, let's just go and allow those updates to come down via the internet. Update channel is also something that you need to understand. And this has been set as a default for the tenant. And I understand, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's set to current channel at the moment. So the update channel is how features are applied to your environment. how often features are applied, and again, there are some pros and cons. So with the current channel, basically, you're going to get those apps and features as soon as they're available. But if you're working in a very restricted environment, sometimes the downside of that is you have less time to test new features. So as I say, my understanding is it's current channel. So once you've got M365 apps rolled out, they should stay very much up to date with the very latest capabilities.
Yeah, it is still current channel.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Scott. And then finally, just one or two tips, tricks, and gotchas. You may have run into the top one before, a bit of a gotcha. There is a compatibility matrix that we publish for M365 with different versions of things like Visio Project and Access. So not all combinations work. So instead of sort of going through that in detail today, there's a link here. If you're having problems, check that link out. You might find you need to look at a different version of Project or Visio to run with your M365 apps. Bit of a tip there, if you're installing M365 apps, let's remove any existing versions of Office before we do that. There are facilities using SCCM, Intune, or the ODT to do that. And then a couple of tricks around shared device scenarios as well. So do talk to Scott. I know he's done a bit of work on this around shared computer activation or device-based activation if that's possible. And then finally, let's ensure delivery optimization is enabled where appropriate. This is going to make sure that the weight of I suppose updates and installation data passing across your environment is minimized. So I think we've got a question there. Chris has got his hand up. Shoot, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Just a quick one just around that shared device scenario. We work with a lot of primary schools. Obviously, one of our regional support teams out on the Air West. And is the advice in like I guess, the early years where they might have a computer lab? I'm going to guess both of those shared computer activation and device-based activation processes, both, even though it's licensed to the computer, still requires O365 sign-in. And if we're working with like reception students that we haven't set them up with their Office 365 identity yet, is the advice still to use 2019 in those scenarios?
I'll probably have to look into that in a bit more detail to the specific scenario. Do they log in? How do they log into those devices today, Chris? Are they just using generic logins, or?
Sometimes generic logins, sometimes very basic individual Active Directory accounts.
Yeah, look, I might follow up with Scott on that one to see what the preference is in the department's environment. We'll get back to you on that one. Yep.
Yeah, Chris, I think they still need to log in with the 365 account, but it doesn't count towards their license quota. So yeah, we'll have to work out something else for that.
Yeah, I mean, we try to work with the schools to make it as easy as possible and try to get the use of the 365 version of the apps as much as possible. We do get that pushback from a reception teacher that if every kid had to log in that lab into Office, then that's going to take up their entire lesson.
Yeah, and look, I'm also in the background. Tasmanian department have a bit of a bugbear about this as well. So they've tasked us with looking at options for K-3 login, because it's not just the password, it's the username as well, right? So how do we make that whole login experience much more straightforward for very young students? Where they can still get individualized settings, and we can still do things like capture the telemetry that's provided about how they're using that device and those services in M365, but a really, really straightforward kind of login process. So that's a bit of a work in progress at the moment. There's no silver bullet. And at the moment, the best we can do if we're looking at M365 apps is one of those two options. Scott, let's do a piece of work on that and see if we can work out what the best option is for this particular scenario.
Yep, and Chris, I think Leander's done some work in this, so we'll involve him too.
Awesome, no worries. Thanks.
Okay, next up is OneDrive. So OneDrive for Business is our kind of personal storage kind of files app within the Microsoft Cloud, enabling us to store and organize all our content. Because it's built on SharePoint services, the files are also secured and protected at the back end. And can be the subject of those compliance services that we talked about before, so things like e-discovery. So this is where we need to make a distinction between OneDrive for Business and OneDrive kind of personal. So I run both of mine on my machine. One of them I use to keep all the kind of, photos of the kids' footy and those kind of things. The other one is my OneDrive for Business that's inside the Microsoft tenant. So when we talk OneDrive here, we're talking OneDrive for Business, which is linked into the Microsoft tenant. So everything's stored on SharePoint. Everything, has those protective capabilities that the SharePoint platform offers. So OneDrive gives you 5 terabytes of storage per user. And we think it really should be the primary location where people store what would traditionally have been a home drive and that type of information. There are some great benefits to using things like OneDrive. It's a synchronized file store. So what it means is if you need to access content from multiple PCs, or if you have a hard disk failure, for example, or a PC stolen or lost, your files are still safe. They're still up there in OneDrive for Business, and you grab a new machine, log in with your Office 365 or Microsoft 365 credentials, connect up to OneDrive, synchronize those files back down. And look, as you work and share files, work together on files and share them around your environment, we've really got those 3 sort of first-class experiences that deliver that intelligent content management. They're all powered by SharePoint in the back end. So just using which, or being able to advise your teachers and your leadership teams on which tools to use when, is probably something you'll be questioned about. So there's no hard and fast rules here, but you often find that a document will travel through a life cycle of being in different places. So I'll often start working on a file individually in my OneDrive. When I'm ready to share it or collaborate on it with my team members, it will move through to Teams. Simply move it from one storage location to another. Sometimes I start a file in Teams as well. But if something's going to be shared more broadly across the organization, so say, for example, we were working on a new HR policy or process, we'd probably look at that ending up in SharePoint because that typically is more straightforward to share things out across the entire organization. We don't tend to recommend teams that have everybody in your 230,000 people organization sitting in the same team. It gets a bit messy. So that's probably a good use for SharePoint. So 3 different levels of storage, sort of grey blurred areas in between them, but generally that's the progression. Personal storage in OneDrive, things I'm working on with my team stored in the relevant place in Teams. And then if I'm disseminating across the entire organization, we look at SharePoint. So OneDrive on the PC, so the sync client is available on a range of different operating systems. So primarily we deal with the Windows side of things. It can store a local copy. You can choose which files are synced to the cloud and which ones stay local, which ones are only in the cloud, and which ones are both. There's also a web interface that you can access via the browser as well, should you need to do so at a later stage. Got a few tips and tricks again. So we've got the adoption resources. There's some great information there. There's a whole playbook and a project plan to help with the change management that's required when you move from things like a file store or people storing things on the hard drive through to looking to deploy OneDrive more broadly. We can look at things like folder redirection. We can set that via Config Manager or Intune or Group Policy. This means that users continue to use those folders they're familiar with, but they'll be redirected and synchronized to OneDrive in the background. And finally, I guess another tip as users are sort of working on increasing numbers of larger files, think about the default settings for those files and whether they're stored locally, stored in the cloud, or available on demand. So we'd recommend you take a look at the settings and sort of based on the user's needs, consider using files on demand as an option to reduce the amount of traffic that's flying backwards and forwards. The final piece then we want to touch on, as we've only got 2 minutes left, is some SharePoint school templates that we built. These are quite an interesting new direction that we've taken. There's a link here to those templates that you can download and enable in your environment should you choose to do so. Is that kind of blurring of Teams and SharePoint. So these are SharePoint sites that are designed to be embedded into Teams. They're designed to bring the sort of rich content that you get in Teams that you don't necessarily get in the chat interface or the file storage within Teams, and present those SharePoint sites within the context, within the navigational elements of Microsoft Teams as well. So there's some things that Teams is really, really good at. There's something that SharePoint's really good at. It's bringing the best of SharePoint, so the rich content, a lot of graphical content, maybe lists of links, etc., and bringing those into the Teams environment. So again, there's a link on the presentation. Take a look at those and work out if there's something that would be useful for your team. for your school, rather, as we look to sort of blur those boundaries between the newer Teams environments and perhaps some of those older SharePoint environments, or indeed modern SharePoint environments based on these templates. And with that, we've pretty much come to the end of today's session for school technicians and IT managers. So we'd be happy to take any further questions, comments, feedback, etc. And we'll make a copy of this presentation available through the team at the department. We're happy to take feedback on what you'd like to see over and above this, or any other content you'd like to see included within this session today. So I'd like to thank Troy for sharing presentation duties with me today, and I'd like to thank the department team for all their input that they've put into today's presentation. So with that, any further questions, or we can wrap? Troy and I will stay on for another 5 minutes or so.